Animal swap number 1. The elephant-sized ants and the ant-sized elephants. Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside, and realizing the world has changed in the most bizarre way possible. Something feels off. The ground vibrates beneath your feet, a strange, rhythmic tremor. In the distance, you hear something, a low, bone-rattling rumble. At first, you think it's an earthquake, but as the rumble grows louder, you realize it's getting closer. Then you see them. At first glance, they look like a herd of elephants, massive bodies moving in unison. But as they get closer, your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are telling you. These creatures aren't elephants. They have 6 legs, segmented bodies, long twitching antennae, and glistening mandibles the size of a car hood. These are ants, but elephant-sized. They tower over everything, each one standing nearly 13 feet tall at the shoulder, their exoskeletons shining like armored tanks. Their movements are unnerving, silent, synchronized, efficient. Then, as if on cue, they start moving faster, their massive legs stomping the ground like living bulldozers. And that's when the real nightmare begins. Ants are already some of the most resilient, adaptable, and highly organized creatures on the planet. At their normal size, they are capable of carrying 50 times their body weight, building intricate underground networks, and coordinating attacks with military precision. But at this size, a single ant could flip a delivery truck like a toy. Their mandibles, once tiny and unnoticeable, are now jaws of destruction, capable of crushing concrete, slicing through trees, and tearing apart reinforced steel. And the worst part, they work together. Unlike large mammals, which hunt and move independently, ants function as a unit. They don't just act alone, they act as a colony, following chemical trails that direct them toward food, shelter, or threats. If one elephant-sized ant finds food, say a human city, it releases pheromones, signaling thousands more to follow. And what do ants do when they find food? They dismantle it. Brick walls, pulverized. Cars, reduced to twisted metal. Buildings, stripped apart piece by piece as mandibles the size of wrecking balls tear through steel beams like they're made of paper. And what happens underground? The entire planet's structure changes overnight. At their normal size, ants dig tunnels that stretch for miles. Now imagine those tunnels scaled up to accommodate creatures the size of elephants. These aren't tunnels anymore. These are underground highways, massive cavern systems that destabilize everything built above them. Skyscrapers tilt and collapse. Entire towns sink into the earth. Highways crumble into endless pits. The world's surface would become Swiss cheese, riddled with sinkholes the size of football fields, as these creatures expand their underground empire. And worst of all, there's no stopping them. Insects don't have emotions like fear or hesitation. They don't need motivation. They exist to expand, conquer, and consume. Humanity would have no defense against them. But here's the twist. These creatures, despite their terrifying power, wouldn't survive for long. At their new size, the very biology that made ants so dominant at a small scale would turn against them. Ants don't have lungs like mammals. Instead, they rely on tiny holes along their bodies, called spiracles, to absorb oxygen. This system works perfectly at their original size, but when scaled up, it completely fails. The larger the ant, the more oxygen it needs, but its spiracle system can't deliver enough. These elephant-sized ants would begin suffocating, their bodies starved of oxygen, their massive limbs struggling to move. Even if they somehow adapted, there's another fatal flaw: their exoskeletons. At their normal size, an ant's exoskeleton is light and flexible, allowing it to move effortlessly. But as body size increases, weight increases even faster, meaning the exoskeleton would become too heavy to support its own body. The sheer force of gravity would crush them under their own weight, their legs snapping like twigs as their armor-like bodies collapse in on themselves. So, as terrifying as elephant-sized ants would be, they would burn out almost as quickly as they appeared. But what about the elephants? At first, the idea of ant-sized elephants sounds adorable. Imagine a tiny herd of miniature elephants, scurrying through the grass, their little trunks wiggling as they explore their new world. But in reality, their fate would be just as tragic, just in the opposite way. Elephants evolved to be large for a reason. Their massive size protects them from predators, helps them store energy efficiently, and allows them to travel long distances without constantly searching for food. But now, at the size of an ant, their entire way of life is destroyed. First, their bodies wouldn't retain heat properly. Large animals are great at keeping warm, because their size helps them conserve body heat. But now, these elephants would lose heat at an insane rate, their tiny bodies unable to hold warmth. Even in normal conditions, they would freeze overnight, their once mighty frames now fragile and defenseless. And let's talk about their trunks. Elephants use their trunks for everything, grabbing food, drinking water, social bonding. But at this tiny scale, their trunks would become useless. They wouldn't be able to hold enough water to drink properly, and their sense of smell, one of the most powerful in the animal kingdom, would be completely disrupted. But their biggest problem would be something far worse. At this size, they wouldn't stand a chance against predators. Think about it. Elephants are usually at the top of the food chain, with almost no natural enemies. But now, a single bird could swallow an entire herd in one gulp. A house cat could wipe them out in seconds. Even ants at their normal size could overwhelm and kill these tiny elephants, ripping them apart as if they were nothing. And their numbers would plummet instantly. Elephants reproduce slowly. A normal elephant takes nearly 2 years to give birth. But now, at the size of an ant, that kind of slow reproduction would be a death sentence. They would disappear within weeks, completely wiped out by the world that used to be built for them. So in the end, this bizarre size swap would be a complete disaster for both species. The ants, once unstoppable, would collapse under their own biology. The elephants, once majestic and dominant, would be crushed by the brutal reality of a world too big for them. And maybe that's proof that nature knew exactly what it was doing when it designed them the way they are. Because if things had gone any differently, well, the world wouldn't be the place we know today. Animal swap number 2, the shark-sized goldfish and the goldfish-sized sharks. Imagine one morning, you walk into your local pet store to check out the usual goldfish tanks. The little orange fish are swimming peacefully, flicking their tails as they circle the bowls. But today, something's different. The moment you approach the tanks, you feel a subtle vibration beneath your feet. Something's not right. You glance into the water, and then you see it, a shark. But not just any shark. This is a goldfish-sized shark. It's swimming around in the tank, its fins moving almost lazily through the water. Your first instinct is to laugh. How could a shark be that small? Isn't it supposed to be huge? A monstrous predator of the ocean. And then your laughter fades as you notice something even more mind-blowing. The goldfish in the tank, they are shark-sized. At first, you think it must be a mistake. These goldfish are growing at a staggering size, their bodies expanding, reaching lengths of 10, 20, 30 feet. You watch in amazement as they move around like giants, their scales shimmering in the light, flicking their tails so powerfully that the water around them ripples. The little plants at the bottom of the tank are now being swept away as these gargantuan fish swim in synchronized patterns, gliding through the water like living submarines. But there's more to this size swap than just visual shock and awe. The reality of a shark-sized goldfish and a goldfish-sized shark would be nothing short of catastrophic. Let's start with the shark-sized goldfish. Goldfish are already known for their surprising adaptability in terms of growth. They can grow quite large in the right environment. Some goldfish, when placed in larger tanks, can reach up to 12-14 inches, even pushing 16 inches in some cases. But imagine if they were to reach the size of a killer whale or a small boat. Goldfish are herbivores, spending their days nibbling on plants, small fish, and algae. They have no real defense mechanisms, no sharp teeth or spines to defend themselves. If these goldfish were to become massive predators in their own right, they would have to evolve drastically. Picture this: a goldfish the size of a shark would likely have to become more aggressive and carnivorous, given the resources it would need to sustain such a large body. Its giant mouth would likely evolve into something more efficient at catching prey, capable of swallowing whole schools of fish, perhaps even attacking larger animals that come into its territory. However, the problem arises when we think about their biology. Goldfish, in their regular size, are built for slow, methodical movements. They rely on their swimming patterns to filter through water, capturing tiny particles and algae. Now, if these fish were scaled up, they'd need an entirely different level of energy to move. The sheer mass of these creatures would demand a massive amount of oxygen and resources, and their bodies would have to be reinforced to withstand the forces exerted by their own size. And there's another issue. Goldfish are cold-blooded, meaning their bodies rely on external temperatures to regulate their heat. A shark-sized goldfish would face temperature regulation issues, as the sheer size of the creature would result in greater difficulty maintaining homeostasis. Essentially, they would be like giant cold-blooded ovens, constantly trying to balance their temperature against the heat of their environment. Without the appropriate water conditions, their metabolism could get completely out of control, leading to overheating or even death. And imagine these giant goldfish in the wild, giant slow-moving targets for predators or even larger creatures. They would become an easy prey for anything larger that would target them, and their peaceful, docile nature wouldn't be equipped to handle such threats. They may thrive in isolated, controlled environments, but out in nature, they would be vulnerable. Now let's turn the tables and talk about the goldfish-sized sharks. A shark at its typical size is a fierce predator, built for speed and power. These creatures have evolved over millions of years to be efficient killing machines, with sharp teeth and instinctual hunting strategies. But when you shrink them down to the size of a goldfish, their primary hunting tactic of slicing through schools of fish and tracking large prey becomes almost useless. You're left with a creature that's both highly capable and incredibly out of place in its new environment. A goldfish-sized shark would be extremely agile, able to dart through small spaces and attack prey much like it did when it was full-sized. However, the problem is that, at such a small size, it would have to face many of the same issues that make goldfish such fragile creatures. Sharks rely on their massive mouths to capture prey, but when scaled down, they simply wouldn't have the force to overpower anything larger than the size of a shrimp. Their aggressive nature, built to tear through meat, would be wasted on tiny creatures that they simply couldn't swallow. They would likely try to attack smaller fish, or even small invertebrates like shrimp, but the small body would lack the muscle power needed to cause significant damage. Another massive problem for these small sharks would be their inability to survive in typical environments. Sharks need vast oceans to roam, and their hunting tactics are often reliant on moving through large bodies of water. A goldfish-sized shark would be completely out of place in the environment it once ruled. Not only would it struggle to find enough food, but it would also be extremely vulnerable to predators. A small bird, even a playful cat, would easily capture and eat it. And the real danger is that these tiny sharks might not be alone. Picture a school of hundreds or thousands of these goldfish-sized sharks, all darting through the water. While they may not be able to hunt effectively, their predatory instincts could still lead them to attack in groups, creating a disruption in the ecosystem that could cause even greater chaos. In conclusion, swapping the sizes of sharks and goldfish would lead to the collapse of their respective ecosystems. The massive goldfish would become unmanageable, with issues around their metabolism and oxygen intake. At the same time, goldfish-sized sharks would struggle to hunt and survive, becoming easy prey and disrupting the natural balance of their habitats. Both creatures would face extinction, overwhelmed by the demands of their new size and environment. It seems like this swap, while incredibly interesting, would show us how evolution has finely tuned each species to fit its size and ecosystem. And while it's fun to imagine what might happen if the rules of nature changed, nature itself tends to get things just right in the end. Animal swap. Number 3. The elephant-sized mouse and the mouse-sized elephant. Imagine this. You're walking through a field, and suddenly you come across a giant mouse the size of an elephant. It's huge, its ears are massive, the tail is long enough to sweep across the ground, and its body is towering over you like a small house. The very idea of a mouse growing so large is baffling. Then, in another twist of fate, you notice something equally strange. A mouse-sized elephant standing nearby, grazing on grass like a tiny version of the colossal creatures we know from nature. Now, as absurd as this sounds, let's dive into what might happen if these two animals could swap their sizes. What would their survival look like in their new forms? Would they thrive, or would evolution go horribly wrong? Let's first take a look at the elephant-sized mouse. In the real world, A mouse weighs just a couple of ounces and stands at only a few inches tall. Mice are quick, agile creatures, built for running through tight spaces and finding small hiding spots. They're perfectly adapted for survival in the nooks and crannies of our world. But what happens when they blow up to the size of an elephant? A full-grown elephant weighs several tons and stands over 10 feet tall, and they are some of the largest terrestrial mammals on Earth. At that size, the elephant-sized mouse would face immediate problems. The first issue is its skeletal structure. Mice are incredibly light animals, and their bones are designed to carry very little weight. Their bones are thin and hollow, and that allows them to be light and agile. But if a mouse suddenly grew to the size of an elephant, it would have to support an incredibly large body. Its bones would be far too weak to carry the massive amount of weight. It would likely suffer from bone fractures and collapse under its own mass, not to mention the massive pressure on its joints and spine. In nature, animals that are this large tend to have reinforced skeletal systems. Elephants have bones that are thick and sturdy to support their weight. The elephant-sized mouse would have none of that support, making it highly vulnerable to injury. Then there's the muscle structure. Mice, being small, have quick, fast twitch muscles that allow them to scamper around at lightning speed. But muscles don't scale up easily. If a mouse were to suddenly become the size of an elephant, its muscles would need to become immensely stronger to support its weight. The biological systems that would allow for such a transformation are just not in place. Not only would the mouse be slow and lumbering, but it would also lack the muscle mass to perform the physical feats it once could. For instance, running, climbing, and jumping, the very skills that mice are known for, would be impossible. On top of this, consider the energy requirements of an elephant-sized mouse. Mice have very high metabolic rates. They eat constantly and burn energy quickly, using a lot of fuel relative to their size. But an elephant-sized mouse would need to consume a tremendous amount of food to maintain its energy, and its small digestive system would simply not be able to keep up with the demand. A mouse's digestive tract is built to handle small amounts of food quickly. If the mouse were the size of an elephant, it would have to eat massive amounts of food, potentially putting stress on the environment and making it nearly impossible to find enough resources to sustain such a creature. And what about the breathing system? Mice breathe quickly to support their high metabolism, but an elephant-sized mouse would need to take in much larger amounts of oxygen to fuel its gigantic body. Its lungs would need to be massively expanded, and it would likely need to breathe much slower to accommodate the sheer volume of air needed to support its size. This could be a major challenge in an ecosystem where resources like food and oxygen are limited. Now let's consider the mouse-sized elephant. Elephants are the largest land mammals on Earth, and they have evolved to be massive and powerful, with bodies that are designed to help them survive in their environments. Their large size helps them travel long distances, access food, and protect themselves from predators. But when an elephant is reduced to the size of a mouse, its survival prospects become questionable. Elephants have a highly developed social structure. They live in groups, and their massive size provides both protection and strength for the herd. A mouse-sized elephant, on the other hand, would be extremely vulnerable. A mouse-sized elephant would have no defense against predators like lions, tigers, or even birds of prey. In the wild, smaller animals are far more vulnerable to predation, and an elephant-sized predator would have no fear of a mouse-sized elephant. Then consider the elephant's diet. Elephants are herbivores, and they need to eat massive amounts of vegetation every day to sustain their size. An adult elephant can consume hundreds of pounds of food daily, primarily grasses, fruits, and tree bark. But when an elephant shrinks to the size of a mouse, its food requirements don't decrease proportionally. A mouse-sized elephant would still have the same nutritional needs, but it would find it almost impossible to find enough food to sustain its tiny body. The environmental impact would also be severe. A mouse-sized elephant would still destroy large areas of vegetation, leading to overgrazing and possibly the collapse of the local ecosystem. Moreover, an elephant-sized creature relies on its large body to help it interact with the world in a specific way. Elephants use their trunks for feeding, social interactions, and even communication. But if the elephant was shrunk down to the size of a mouse, its trunk would become completely useless. It would not be able to use it to reach high branches or gather food efficiently, and its large ears would no longer serve the purpose they were originally designed for. The social structure of elephants would be completely disrupted, and the tiny elephant would likely not be able to live a social, protective life as it once did. Finally, think about the energy needs of a mouse-sized elephant. At its regular size, an elephant is a slow-moving, energy-intensive animal. It needs to conserve its energy by moving efficiently and using its strength to forage. But a tiny elephant would have to adjust to life with a much higher metabolic rate, meaning it would need to consume food at a much higher rate compared to other animals of its size. This would create a vicious cycle of needing to constantly find food, which it likely would struggle to do. In conclusion, while it's fun to think about a world where the elephant-sized mouse and the mouse-sized elephant exist, nature's design has a reason for the size of each of these creatures. Their physical and biological makeup is intricately linked to their size, and scaling them up or down would disrupt the delicate balance of their ecosystems. These animals were perfectly designed for their original size, and changing that would only result in chaos. Evolution has equipped these creatures with exactly what they need to thrive in their respective environments, and altering their size would likely lead to their demise. Animal swap number 4. The giraffe-sized chinchilla and the chinchilla-sized giraffe. Imagine a world where the smallest, cutest, and fluffiest rodent, the chinchilla, grows to the size of a giraffe, towering above you with its thick fur coat, massive ears, and large eyes. Now, picture the opposite scenario, a giraffe shrinking down to the size of a chinchilla. How would this swap affect the survival of both animals? And what would the world look like with such drastically altered creatures? First, let's talk about the giraffe-sized chinchilla. Chinchillas are small rodents, typically weighing between 1 and 2 pounds, with soft, dense fur. They are native to the high-altitude regions of South America, where their thick fur helps keep them warm in the chilly climate. They are agile climbers, jumping and navigating rocky terrain with ease. But what happens when this adorable, fluffy creature grows to be as tall as a giraffe? For starters, the chinchilla's structure would have to undergo radical changes. The sheer mass of a giraffe's size is immense, standing around 14 to 18 feet tall and weighing anywhere between 2,400 to 3,000 pounds. A giraffe-sized chinchilla would need much stronger bones and muscles to support such a large body. Chinchillas have delicate, lightweight skeletons, designed for their small size. Their bones are designed to be as light as possible, to help them navigate rocky environments. To support a giraffe-sized body, their bones would need to be massively reinforced, making them heavier and more prone to fractures. The large ears of a chinchilla might also become impractical at such a scale. While they help chinchillas with hearing in the wild, at giraffe size, they would probably be too large and unwieldy, making it hard for the animal to function normally. In terms of movement, a giraffe-sized chinchilla would struggle immensely. The muscle structure needed to support its enormous size would likely be far too weak for the task. Chinchillas rely on their quick, nimble movements to avoid predators, and they are excellent jumpers and climbers. But a giant chinchilla, with its tiny legs and relatively small body mass in proportion to its size, would not be able to leap, climb, or even run effectively. A giraffe-sized chinchilla would probably move in a slow, awkward fashion, incapable of taking advantage of the agility that chinchillas are known for. Feeding would also be a challenge. Chinchillas eat a very specific diet, mostly consisting of hay, grasses, and the occasional herb or small leaf. They need a constant supply of food to fuel their metabolism. Scaling this up to giraffe size would mean the chinchilla would need to consume massive amounts of food to sustain its larger body. And because its digestive system is built for a much smaller animal, it would struggle to process that food efficiently. Unlike giraffes, which can browse and feed on tree leaves from towering trees, a chinchilla would likely be stuck looking for smaller vegetation, making it incredibly difficult to sustain itself. If it tried to feed on the same kind of food it does now, it could easily face nutritional deficiencies or starvation. Breathing would also pose a serious issue. Chinchillas breathe fast to support their high metabolism, but a giraffe-sized chinchilla would need to take in far more oxygen. This would require larger lungs and a more powerful cardiovascular system, which it simply does not have. Giraffes have large lungs and a slow metabolism to support their size, but chinchillas, being small and fast-moving creatures, don't have the same capacity. If a chinchilla were suddenly scaled up to the size of a giraffe, it would likely struggle to get enough oxygen to its body, leading to respiratory failure or circulatory collapse. Now let's shift our focus to the chinchilla-sized giraffe. The reality of a giraffe shrinking down to the size of a chinchilla would present a host of unique challenges for the creature. Giraffes are some of the tallest animals on Earth, reaching heights of up to 18 feet. Their long necks, long legs, and massive bodies are adapted to help them reach high foliage in the trees, a critical part of their diet. But a chinchilla-sized giraffe, standing just a foot or two tall, would have no use for its towering neck. The long neck, which giraffes rely on to reach high branches, would now be completely out of proportion to its tiny body. The giraffe would be forced to lower its head and graze on small shrubs, grass, and other low-lying plants, much like the animals it shares its environment with. One of the most striking features of a giraffe is its height. This allows it to look over the tops of trees and spot predators from a distance. But when reduced to the size of a chinchilla, the giraffe would lose its ability to see predators from afar, making it incredibly vulnerable. In its new tiny form, a giraffe would have no natural advantage when it comes to spotting danger. It would be at the mercy of larger predators, who could easily capture it. Additionally, giraffes are known for their massive legs and large, powerful bodies. These are designed to support their long necks and allow them to cover vast distances in search of food. But at chinchilla size, the giraffe's long legs would become completely useless. The legs would look out of proportion with the tiny body, and the giraffe would no longer be able to run efficiently. In the wild, speed and mobility are often essential for survival, and the giraffe, now reduced to the size of a chinchilla, would be unable to escape from predators. It could very easily become prey for animals that are faster and more agile, such as birds of prey or small carnivores. The giraffe's diet would also change dramatically in this new form. Giraffes are herbivores that eat leaves from tall trees, but at a smaller size, they would be forced to feed on smaller plants like shrubs or grass. But at such a tiny size, they would struggle to find enough food to meet their nutritional needs. Giraffes rely on a specialized diet of high-energy leaves, and reducing them to the size of a chinchilla would create serious issues with nutrient deficiencies. The small giraffe would not be able to feed as effectively, and its smaller stomach would mean it couldn't consume enough food to maintain its energy levels. Social structures would also be impacted. Giraffes are known for their social nature, living in groups for protection and support. But at such a small size, a giraffe would have difficulty interacting with other giraffes. Its size would make it harder to participate in the social behaviors and movements that help protect the herd. In fact, the chinchilla-sized giraffe might even find it impossible to communicate effectively with others of its species, and its social bonds could be severely weakened. The final issue that the tiny giraffe would face is its vulnerable nature. A small giraffe would be easy prey for almost every predator. With its small size, it would have no defense mechanisms to protect itself. In the wild, giraffes rely on their size and strength to defend themselves from lions and other predators. But a chinchilla-sized giraffe, now the size of an easy target, would likely have no way to defend itself, making it incredibly easy to hunt down. In conclusion, both the giraffe-sized chinchilla and the chinchilla-sized giraffe would face severe challenges in terms of survival. While the idea of such drastic size changes is fascinating, it quickly becomes clear that these animals' size and body structures are perfectly suited to their environments. A giraffe-sized chinchilla would struggle to survive due to its weak bones, inefficient digestive system, and inability to move or eat effectively. Similarly, a chinchilla-sized giraffe would suffer from a loss of its height advantage, inefficient movement, and an inability to find enough food. Evolution has shaped each species in a way that is perfectly suited to their current size and environment, and altering these characteristics would likely result in disaster for both animals. Animal swap number 5. The eagle-sized hummingbird and the hummingbird-sized eagle. Now imagine a world where the smallest bird, the hummingbird, grows to the size of an eagle, and the majestic eagle shrinks down to the size of a hummingbird. The rapid flapping wings of a tiny hummingbird, which can beat up to 80 times per second, would have the power of an eagle's massive wingspan and strength, while an eagle, once a fierce predator, would be shrunk to the tiny size of a hummingbird, flitting about in search of food and shelter. Let's begin by imagining the hummingbird-sized eagle. The average eagle has a wingspan of about 6 to 7 feet, and it's one of the most powerful birds of prey. Eagles are known for their powerful talons, keen eyesight, and exceptional flying ability. But what would happen if an eagle were suddenly reduced to the size of a hummingbird, which typically measures just about 3 to 5 inches in length? First, we need to consider the wingspan. Eagles' large wings provide them with high lift to carry their heavy bodies through the air, but a hummingbird-sized eagle would have to rely on a smaller wingspan, around 6 inches or so, too small to support a large bird's weight. The eagle's large body is adapted to soar for miles, hunting from great heights, but at hummingbird size, this powerful bird would be far less capable of soaring or gliding. Eagles are known for their ability to glide for long distances with minimal effort, using thermal updrafts to stay aloft. A tiny eagle would likely struggle to maintain any kind of sustained flight, and would be stuck flapping its wings rapidly to stay in the air, similar to how hummingbirds do it now. But despite their extraordinary flying capabilities, hummingbirds require immense energy to hover, and this tiny eagle would likely not be able to generate enough lift or power to keep itself airborne for long. Next, consider the feeding habits of a hummingbird-sized eagle. Eagles are carnivorous, and their diet consists mostly of fish, small mammals, and sometimes birds. But in the miniature world of a hummingbird, an eagle would have to change its hunting methods drastically. A small eagle would likely be unable to hunt large prey effectively, and its impressive talons would now be far too small to capture anything of significant size. It would also have difficulty scavenging, as the environment would no longer accommodate the food sources that the eagle is accustomed to. A hummingbird-sized eagle would struggle to survive in the wild without an effective hunting strategy and a massive amount of adaptation to its diet. As for its vision, eagles are famous for their extraordinary eyesight. They can see prey from miles away, spotting fish swimming in the water below. But for a hummingbird-sized eagle, its sharp eyesight may become an issue. The tiny eagle would have to rely on extremely close-range vision to detect its prey, and this would reduce its ability to scan large areas of land or water effectively. Moreover, as a tiny bird, its eyesight might not be as well developed as it is in its original form, further limiting its survival chances. Now, let's shift gears and imagine a hummingbird-sized eagle flying around, trying to survive in the wild. A tiny eagle would be extremely vulnerable to larger predators. If a predator like a hawk or falcon came by, the tiny eagle would have no defense. The eagle is a top predator in the bird world, but at hummingbird size, it would become easy prey for just about any carnivorous animal that could outmaneuver it. Its tiny size would be a severe disadvantage in an ecosystem where size, speed, and power are essential for survival. But what about the hummingbird-sized eagle's wings? While it may seem that the eagle's large wings could compensate for its small size, they would be far too large and inefficient for such a tiny body. A hummingbird-sized eagle would have wings out of proportion with its tiny body, making it hard to fly in any kind of sustained or controlled way. Hummingbirds need rapid wing beats to stay airborne, but the eagle's wings, designed for long-distance flight and soaring, would be ill-suited to the task. Without a proper structure and adapted wing movement, the tiny eagle would find it difficult to sustain flight for more than a few seconds at a time. Next, let's move on to the eagle-sized hummingbird, a tiny creature with the power of an eagle's massive wingspan. Hummingbirds are known for their incredible agility and ability to hover in place. They can fly in any direction, even backwards, thanks to their ability to rotate their wings in a circular motion. But imagine if this amazing flying ability was transferred to a bird with the size and power of an eagle. The eagle-sized hummingbird would have an enormous wingspan, more than 6 feet, and it would be able to hover in place with extreme precision, darting in and out of its surroundings with the speed and grace of a hummingbird. However, the problem would be with the eagle's body. Eagles are much heavier than hummingbirds, with some species weighing as much as 3 to 4 kilograms, about 7 to 9 pounds. An eagle-sized hummingbird would be significantly heavier than a normal hummingbird, but its wings, despite being large, wouldn't have the strength or capability to support such a massive body in flight. It would face the same challenges as a hummingbird-sized eagle, the impossibility of sustained flight, not to mention the drain on its metabolism. Hummingbirds are already known for having one of the fastest metabolisms in the animal kingdom, but an eagle-sized hummingbird would need to consume enormous amounts of food to keep up with its metabolism. The eagle-sized hummingbird's body wouldn't be able to fly effectively without crashing due to the imbalance between its size and the forces required to keep it airborne. When we talk about flight, another major issue arises: the energy consumption of an eagle-sized hummingbird. Hummingbirds are capable of hovering by beating their wings incredibly fast, around 50 to 80 times per second, which requires immense energy. Now, imagine an eagle with massive wings trying to hover like a hummingbird. The tiny bird's body would burn through calories at a rate far beyond what it could sustain, leading to rapid exhaustion. The hummingbird would be forced to land constantly, unable to stay airborne for long periods, which would severely limit its ability to search for food or avoid predators. Flight is an integral part of a hummingbird's survival strategy, but an eagle-sized hummingbird would lack the necessary body structure and energy reserves to maintain flight for long. Another challenge would come from the hummingbird's tiny digestive system. Hummingbirds feed on nectar, and they are capable of digesting it very quickly, often feeding multiple times per minute. The small size of their digestive organs allows them to process food efficiently, but if a hummingbird was scaled up to the size of an eagle, it would need to consume far more food to sustain its energy needs, but its tiny digestive system wouldn't be able to keep up. As a result, the bird would likely struggle to find enough nectar to feed its larger body, which would eventually lead to starvation. In conclusion, both the hummingbird-sized eagle and the eagle-sized hummingbird would face major survival challenges. While the hummingbird-sized eagle would be too small and weak to hunt, the eagle-sized hummingbird would be far too large to maintain its impressive flight skills. Evolution has adapted these species for their specific environments, and scaling them up or down would lead to serious physiological mismatches. These extreme size swaps are fun to imagine, but they would likely result in the downfall of these fascinating creatures. Animal swap number 6. The lion-sized house cat and the house cat-sized lion. Imagine if the world's most beloved pet, the house cat, grew to the size of a lion, while the king of the jungle, the lion, shrank down to the size of a domestic feline. The implications for both animals and their environments would be wild, to say the least. From domestic life to the African savanna, this swap of sizes would lead to drastic changes in behavior, survival strategies, and how these animals interact with their ecosystems. Let's dive into how evolution would be dramatically altered if the house cat became the size of a lion, and the lion shrank to the size of a house cat. First, let's consider the house cat-sized lion. The average lion weighs about 400 pounds and is built to take down large prey, such as zebras, antelopes, and buffalo. They have incredible strength and hunting skills, built to stalk, pounce, and overpower animals many times their size. But now, imagine a house cat-sized lion, about 10–15 pounds in weight, roughly the size of a typical domestic cat. The massive size difference would fundamentally alter the lion's ability to hunt, defend its territory, and survive in the wild. At this size, the lion's hunting tactics would no longer be effective. Lions typically rely on their size and strength to overpower large herbivores, but a tiny lion would lack the power to take down such large prey. Instead, it would have to hunt animals like small rodents, birds, and perhaps insects. But the lion's sharp claws and teeth, designed for gripping and killing large animals, would no longer be as effective when hunting tiny creatures. Additionally, its roar, which can be heard up to 5 miles away, would be lost on smaller prey, as the noise would be much less intimidating when scaled down to such a tiny version. Lions are social animals, often living in prides and relying on teamwork to hunt and protect each other. But in this new tiny form, the lion would be far more vulnerable to predators. It would no longer be the top predator in its environment, and its social structure would become irrelevant. The tiny lion would have to fend for itself, relying on stealth rather than brute strength to survive. The lion's mane, a symbol of its dominance and masculinity, would also lose its significance at such a small size. A tiny lion would no longer look intimidating to other animals in the wild, and it would have to be more elusive and agile to avoid threats. The lion's diet would also change drastically. While it's accustomed to eating large amounts of meat, a house cat-sized lion would likely need to consume much smaller portions to survive, and its caloric intake would need to be adapted to its new size. The need for larger quantities of food would be replaced by the need for high-frequency hunting, seeking smaller prey multiple times per day. However, finding enough prey to sustain itself in a world dominated by large animals would pose a significant challenge. Next, let's look at the house cat-sized lion in terms of its reproduction. Lions, as large mammals, have relatively long gestation periods and give birth to small litters of cubs. The size swap would lead to changes in reproduction. A tiny lion would likely have a much shorter gestation period and would give birth to more kittens at once, similar to how domestic cats have litters of multiple kittens. However, the lion's tiny body would require significant energy to care for its growing offspring, and the reduced size would make it more difficult to find the resources needed to sustain its young. Now, let's turn to the house cat-sized lion's interaction with the environment. Normally, lions dominate their habitats, maintaining territories that stretch for miles and keeping other predators away. But now, this tiny lion would be competing for resources with much smaller animals, rodents, smaller predators, and other domestic pets. The lion's behavior would likely shift from one of dominance and power to that of a skittish, secretive predator, trying to avoid much larger animals and finding places to hide. It would no longer be the feared apex predator of the savannah, but rather a small, quick-moving animal that has to hide to survive. Camouflage and stealth would become much more important for its survival, relying on a sneakier, more intelligent approach to hunting rather than brute force. On the flip side, the lion-sized house cat would have an entirely different set of challenges and advantages. A house cat typically weighs about 10 pounds, has sharp claws and is built for agility and hunting small prey. But what if a house cat grew to the size of a lion, a creature that can weigh up to 400 pounds? Imagine the changes in proportions, physical abilities, and overall mood that would accompany this change. A house cat the size of a lion would have a massive increase in strength, and its already powerful claws would become even more deadly. At lion size, the house cat would be an enormous force in its environment. It could easily overpower its prey, such as rodents, birds, and other small animals. But while its size and strength would make it a formidable hunter, it would also have to deal with a greater metabolism. Larger animals need far more food to sustain themselves, and this would be a huge challenge for a house cat turned lion. It would have to hunt large quantities of meat, likely leading to conflicts with other apex predators in the area. A lion-sized house cat would need to eat significantly more food, and hunting success wouldn't be guaranteed. It would be much harder to find enough prey to keep up with its new size, and the cat might even turn to scavenging. Another challenge for a lion-sized house cat would be its territorial behavior. House cats are known for being very territorial, marking their boundaries and often showing aggression to anyone who enters their space. But now, imagine that instinct magnified to an enormous scale. A lion-sized house cat would mark large areas with urine and even become more aggressive toward other predators. However, it wouldn't be able to retreat to a small, comfortable home like a domestic cat. It would need a vast area to roam, potentially even rivaling the size of a lion's territory. The cat's intelligence, agility, and reflexes would now be incredibly dangerous for any animal that tried to challenge its space. The social behavior of a lion-sized house cat would also be interesting. Domestic cats are solitary creatures, but they can also form loose social groups in places where food is plentiful. A house cat that grew to the size of a lion might still retain some of its solitary nature, but it would also need to establish its dominance in the wild. The larger size would give the cat an advantage in combat, but it might also force it to become more social in order to defend its territory and find food sources. Whether it would live alone like a lion, or share its space with others, would be an intriguing question in terms of social structure. Finally, let's consider the overall impact of this size swap on the environment. If house cats grew to the size of lions, they would have a massive impact on the food chain. They would prey on larger animals, potentially displacing other predators in the ecosystem. Meanwhile, the tiny lions would find themselves struggling to survive in an environment where their strength and size no longer provided the advantages they once had. These disrupted ecosystems would change rapidly, and survival would hinge on adaptation, whether it's the tiny lions evolving new hunting tactics or the house cats learning to coexist with other animals. In conclusion, the idea of the lion-sized house cat and the house cat-sized lion presents a fun thought experiment. but it's clear that the animal's size plays a crucial role in their ability to survive and thrive. Each animal's unique behavior, hunting strategies, and physical abilities are all designed to fit their current sizes, and changing them would lead to dramatic consequences in their survival strategies and interactions with their environments. Animal swap number 7, the dog-sized bear and the bear-sized dog. Now imagine a world where bears are the size of dogs, and dogs have grown to the size of bears. The vast size difference between these animals, if swapped, would create a completely new dynamic not only in how these creatures would survive, but also in the way they would interact with their environment and other species. Bears, which are usually towering, powerful creatures weighing hundreds of pounds, would become the size of chubby little puppies. Meanwhile, the beloved family dog would now be as massive and fearsome as the biggest bears. Let's explore the changes that would come with this incredible size swap and the consequences for both species. First, let's imagine what the world would look like if bears shrank down to the size of dogs. Normally, bears are impressive in size, with adult males reaching weights between 300 and 600 pounds, depending on the species, and they are built to take on large prey and defend themselves against threats. But when shrunk to the size of a domestic dog, typically 20 to 100 pounds, the bear's strength and ability to hunt would be drastically reduced. While it might still possess the ferocious attitude and some of the physical features that make it a fearsome predator, it would be much more vulnerable to other larger predators, such as wolves or large wild cats. At dog size, bears would no longer be able to take down the larger prey they rely on, like moose, deer, or smaller mammals. Their sharp claws and teeth, designed to shred through tough hides and grip onto large prey, would be far less effective on smaller animals. Instead of hunting large mammals, the bear would have to rely on smaller animals like squirrels, rabbits, or maybe even birds, much like how a domesticated dog might chase small critters in a yard. With the size of a dog, it would likely also be less interested in hunting and more inclined to scavenge from the leftovers of other predators or humans. Another interesting factor is the bear's diet. Bears are typically omnivores, eating a mix of meat and vegetation. A dog-sized bear would still need to consume a significant amount of food to maintain its energy levels, but the challenge would be finding enough prey. While bears are opportunistic feeders, it's likely that the smaller size would force them to scavenge more than they would naturally do in the wild. Berries, nuts, and insects might replace larger meals, and the bear's diet would have to be adapted to its new size. This adaptation could lead to competition with smaller omnivores like raccoons or foxes, further limiting the bear's access to food. The bear's behavior would also shift in response to its new size. Normally, bears are highly territorial animals that establish large territories that can span hundreds of miles. These territories are essential for their survival, as they give them access to enough food to sustain their large bodies. But when bears shrink to the size of dogs, their territories would shrink considerably. They might still exhibit territorial behavior, but would be forced to compete with other animals like coyotes, wolves, and large wild dogs, which could now pose a real threat to them. Rather than being at the top of the food chain, the dog-sized bear might find itself being pushed around by these smaller, more agile predators. On the flip side, let's consider what would happen if dogs grew to the size of bears. Dogs are often seen as loyal, friendly companions, and many breeds are built for specific purposes, such as herding, hunting, or guarding. But when a dog becomes the size of a bear, the dynamics of their behavior and role in human society would shift in dramatic ways. A bear-sized dog would have the strength and ferocity of a bear, combined with the social and affectionate nature of a dog. First, think about the physical changes. If a dog grew to be the size of a bear, it would likely weigh anywhere between 300 and 1,200 pounds. Imagine a golden retriever, Labrador, or German shepherd, but now as large as a grizzly bear. The dog's body would have to adapt to carry this new weight, and its muscles and bones would need to be much stronger to support its bulk. The energy consumption of such a dog would be astronomical. Larger animals require far more food to maintain their size, and a bear-sized dog would need a constant supply of food to avoid malnourishment. The dog's behavior would also be vastly different. Currently, dogs are incredibly social animals that live in homes with humans, acting as companions, guardians, and helpers. But with a size increase to that of a bear, the dog's need for space would also grow, and it would likely have to live in a much larger environment. These dogs would not fit into a typical suburban home or apartment. Instead, they would need vast yards, or even entire estates to roam and exercise. A dog this size would still retain its playful nature, but it could easily damage property or harm people unintentionally, simply by virtue of its massive size. The sheer strength and power of a bear-sized dog would make it incredibly dangerous if it got excited or frightened. A playful leap could end up breaking furniture or sending people flying through the air. Even though most dogs are incredibly friendly and loyal, this new size would lead to unintended accidents, making it difficult for such a large animal to live with people without causing major risks. A bear-sized dog would also need an incredible amount of food, even more than a bear. It could easily eat hundreds of pounds of food a day, from large cuts of meat to an abundance of vegetation. Its massive stomach would demand constant refilling, and finding enough food in the wild might become problematic. While a dog is often able to survive on a diet of kibble, a bear-sized dog would need fresh raw food every day, meaning it would have to hunt on its own or rely on humans to provide food in bulk. And what about interaction with other animals? A bear-sized dog would still be the same lovable, playful creature at heart, but with the strength of a bear, it could easily overpower smaller animals. It would likely still have the instincts of a hunter and would chase after small creatures, just like a normal dog chases squirrels, but its massive size would make it more difficult for it to catch smaller animals. Its agility would be impaired by its size, so it would have to rely on sheer strength to catch prey, which could lead to an imbalance in the local ecosystems. Instead of being a friendly and harmless member of the home, the bear-sized dog would be a predator, inadvertently threatening the survival of much smaller animals, including small dogs and cats. On the social side, the bear-sized dog might still want to engage with other dogs and even humans, but the interactions would have to be carefully controlled. A dog's behavior in a pack could become a problem, as a group of bear-sized dogs might easily destroy anything in their path. Playfulness could easily turn into full-blown destructive behavior, not because the dogs were vicious, but because of their overwhelming size. The bear-sized dog would also be vulnerable to the same kind of problems that bears face in the wild: the challenge of finding enough food and maintaining a healthy social structure. It's likely that larger dogs would need to form packs, similar to the way wolves hunt in large groups, to sustain themselves and defend their territory. Without the social structure of a pack, these giant dogs could become isolated and vulnerable to predators or a lack of food. However, their larger size could also make them more prone to injury, as their massive bodies would be more susceptible to joint problems and physical damage. In conclusion, if we swap the sizes of bears and dogs, it would have far-reaching consequences for both species. The dog-sized bear would no longer be a dominant predator, and would likely struggle to survive, forced to adapt to a new diet and more vulnerable existence. Meanwhile, the bear-sized dog would change from a beloved pet to a dangerous and demanding force of nature, likely causing chaos in households and ecosystems. This swap of size would dramatically change their behavior, their relationship with humans, and their survival strategies, ultimately leading to a world where both animals would have to adapt to entirely new ways of life. Animal swap. Number 8. The polar bear-sized seal and the seal-sized polar bear. Imagine a world where polar bears are the size of seals, and seals have grown to the size of polar bears. This swap would turn the Arctic ecosystem on its head, creating a completely new set of challenges for both species. Let's dive into this thought experiment and explore how this size swap would impact their survival, behavior, and role in the wild. To start with, let's imagine the polar bear shrinking to the size of a seal. Normally, polar bears are massive predators that can weigh anywhere between 900 to 1,600 pounds, with some large males even tipping the scales at over 2,000 pounds. Their size and strength make them the top predators in the Arctic, capable of hunting seals, walruses, and even beluga whales. But what would happen if these powerful bears were reduced to the size of seals, which typically weigh only 300 to 600 pounds? The polar bear's position as the top predator would be drastically altered. With their size dramatically reduced, polar bears would no longer be able to hunt the large prey they rely on, such as seals and walruses. The polar bear's hunting strategies, which often involve stalking seals from the ice or ambushing prey in the water, would be much less effective. Without the strength to overpower larger animals, the polar bears would have to rely on smaller prey or scavenging from other predators. At this size, the bear would likely still maintain some of its aggressive instincts, but would become far more vulnerable to other predators. Arctic wolves, glaucous gulls, and even smaller seals might pose a threat to the miniaturized polar bear, as it would no longer have the size or power to fend them off. In this new form, the polar bears would likely be forced to adopt a more cautious and opportunistic approach to survival, relying more on scavenging than active predation. One of the most significant consequences of this size swap would be the polar bear's diet. Polar bears are opportunistic omnivores, with a preference for high-calorie fat, primarily from their seal-based diet. They would now have to find smaller animals to eat, such as smaller fish, invertebrates, and possibly even scavenging from larger seal carcasses. They could also be forced to adapt to eating plants and algae in the absence of larger prey. The smaller size of the bear would make it more agile, but also more vulnerable to starvation or injury. Without the ability to consume large prey, the bear's health could deteriorate over time. In contrast, seals growing to the size of polar bears would be a sight to behold. Imagine a seal weighing upwards of 1,000 pounds, covered in thick, blubber-filled layers to protect it from the freezing Arctic waters. The seal's primary survival trait, its ability to slip through the water with speed and grace, would be compromised by its massive size. The larger body would be much harder to maneuver in the water, making it more susceptible to predators like orcas and polar bears. While seals are naturally excellent swimmers and divers, a polar bear-sized seal would struggle to maintain its speed and agility. Instead of darting away from danger, it might become an easier target for hunters. At this size, the seal would need a vast amount of food to sustain itself, far more than its smaller counterparts. It could still feast on fish, krill, and other marine creatures, but the energy required to sustain such a large body would put tremendous pressure on its ability to find food. Its usual diet of smaller prey would no longer suffice, and it would have to consume larger quantities of food to keep up with its energy needs. This could lead to competition with other larger marine animals, like walruses or even whales, which could result in conflicts over food sources. The seal's size would also have an impact on its breeding habits. Normally, seals give birth on land or ice floes, where they are relatively safe from predators. However, a polar bear-sized seal would face difficulties in finding appropriate breeding grounds. It would need much larger spaces to give birth, and would be much more vulnerable to predators during this time. A bear-sized seal could easily find itself stranded or unable to escape from danger, given its size and the lack of appropriate escape routes on the ice. In addition, its blubber, which is essential for insulation in freezing waters, would need to be even thicker to support its larger body. Maintaining that amount of fat could be a challenge, and it would make the seal more susceptible to overheating during long migrations. The behavior of a polar bear-sized seal would also differ from the more typical, smaller version. Seals are often solitary creatures, though some species, like harbor seals, form small colonies. A larger seal would likely still prefer isolation, as it would need more space and fewer resources to thrive. The interaction with other animals, both predators and prey, would shift dramatically, as the larger seal might compete with other massive animals for food, space, and breeding opportunities. Mating rituals could be altered as well, with larger seals needing to contend with the physical challenges of mating at such an enormous size. The swap of size between these two iconic Arctic animals would create a complete transformation in how both species would live and survive. Polar bears, once top predators, would now face extreme difficulties in hunting and maintaining their dominance. They would become more reliant on scavenging and would likely find themselves vulnerable to other Arctic predators. Seals, on the other hand, would experience a huge increase in their need for food, space, and protection, becoming massive, lumbering creatures unable to evade predators or hunt efficiently. The Arctic ecosystem itself would be fundamentally changed, with new interactions, food webs, and survival strategies emerging. In conclusion, if polar bears and seals were to swap sizes, it would lead to an ecosystem filled with strange new challenges and opportunities. The delicate balance of the Arctic food chain would be upset, and these creatures would have to adapt in ways that might not be sustainable. While the polar bear-sized seal could continue to survive in a much more difficult world, the dog-sized polar bear would struggle to survive without the strength and power it once relied on to dominate the environment. Such a swap would reshape not just the animals themselves, but the entire Arctic ecosystem in ways we can only begin to imagine. Animal swap number 9, the mouse-sized cat and the cat-sized mouse. Imagine a world where mice have grown to the size of cats, and cats have been shrunk down to the size of mice. This size swap would fundamentally change the relationship between these two creatures and could have far-reaching effects on their survival, behavior, and the ecosystems they inhabit. In this thought experiment, let's explore what would happen if mice were the size of cats and cats were the size of mice. To start, let's think about what it would mean if mice suddenly grew to be the size of cats. Normally, a mouse weighs just a few ounces, scurrying around in the corners of homes and fields, sneaking into places unnoticed, and surviving by being quick and elusive. But a mouse the size of a cat would be a completely different creature. Suddenly, it would be large enough to pose a significant challenge to its predators. Its size would likely make it more difficult to hide from other animals, and its survival instincts would have to adapt to a completely different set of circumstances. First, the food requirements of a mouse-sized cat would change drastically. Mice are opportunistic feeders, munching on grains, seeds, and whatever they can scavenge from their environment. But a mouse the size of a cat would require far more food to sustain itself. It might need to start preying on other smaller animals, such as insects, birds, or even small reptiles. The territorial behavior of mice would also change. They would no longer live in burrows or crevices, but instead would likely establish larger territories. These larger territories would create competition among mice, as food sources and space would become limited, making life much harder for them. The fact that the mouse is now much larger means that it would have to face an entirely new set of predators. While mice are generally prey for animals like owls, hawks, and snakes, a cat-sized mouse could now face a whole new set of predators. Larger carnivores, like foxes or even larger birds of prey, would be much more capable of attacking these oversized mice. In turn, the agility and speed that typically help mice escape predators would be lost. Now, with their larger size, they'd likely struggle to outrun threats, and might be more vulnerable to capture. In contrast, if cats were the size of mice, their entire approach to hunting and survival would have to be completely reimagined. Cats are natural predators, equipped with sharp claws, keen eyesight, and lightning-fast reflexes that allow them to catch their prey quickly. But a cat the size of a mouse would find itself in a very different situation. The once feared and majestic hunter would become small and somewhat helpless in a world dominated by larger predators. Cats' instincts to hunt and stalk would remain, but their reduced size would make them more vulnerable. Smaller prey animals like birds, mice, and insects might be more difficult for the shrunken cat to catch, as they would have to deal with their own predators now at a comparable size or larger. It's likely that these miniature cats would have to rely on stealth and agility to survive, using their cunning to sneak up on prey rather than overpower it. They may become more like mice in terms of their behavior, more cautious, moving swiftly and quietly through their environment in search of food. Hunting techniques would be affected too. Normally, a cat can take down prey much larger than itself, using its strength and powerful jaws. But in this new scenario, the miniature cats would be forced to target much smaller prey or adjust to using more clever strategies to survive. They might have to scavenge more often or rely on insects and small rodents for food. Their ability to stalk and pounce would also be limited by their reduced size, meaning they would need to get much closer to their prey to succeed. One interesting consequence of a cat-sized mouse and a mouse-sized cat would be the balance of ecosystems. Cats play a crucial role in controlling the populations of smaller animals like rodents and birds, and their smaller size would certainly change this dynamic. If mice were suddenly larger and more formidable, their ability to reproduce at high rates and outcompete smaller animals might lead to an increase in their numbers. However, with the lack of natural predators, like the former cats, their population could grow uncontrollably, potentially leading to significant damage to crops, homes, and infrastructure. On the other hand, with cats reduced to mouse size, they would become prey rather than predators. A world where cats are no longer the apex hunters could lead to an explosion of populations of smaller animals, such as mice, insects, and birds, which would otherwise have been kept in check. The increase in prey species could lead to ecosystem imbalances, where certain species proliferate, while others struggle to survive. the altered food chain would ripple through the environment, changing the habitats and biodiversity of the areas where both animals once thrived. Furthermore, the interaction between the two animals would also change. Normally, mice and cats share a predator-prey relationship, with cats hunting mice. But now, with both creatures changing in size, the dynamic would be completely flipped. The larger mouse would likely continue its usual behavior of scavenging, but it might also encounter miniature cats that attempt to sneak up on it or other small prey. In this reverse situation, the larger mouse could become more aggressive in defending itself, and the smaller cats might find it more difficult to compete for resources. They would likely need to rely on their ability to hide, sneak, and take advantage of vulnerable prey. These two creatures, with their size swap, would completely transform the way we think about predator and prey. The cat's powerful presence as a predator would be diminished, while the mouse's role as a prey animal would be turned on its head. The relationship between these two animals is central to many food webs, and changing their sizes would have a profound impact on the animals they interact with. This swap of size also raises questions about evolutionary development. For example, how did cats become such efficient hunters in the first place? Their sharp claws, keen senses, and lightning reflexes were all honed to help them capture larger prey. Would their instincts still remain intact if their size were drastically reduced? Similarly, would mice retain their agility and speed if they were now much larger and slower? The evolutionary pressures that shape these animals would be completely different in a world where their sizes are swapped. In conclusion, a world where mice and cats swapped sizes would create a chaotic and unpredictable environment. The food chain would be altered, survival strategies would shift, and the delicate balance between predator and prey would be upended. While the once mighty cat would become a much more vulnerable animal, the once defenseless mouse would become a formidable force. The world would look vastly different, and it's difficult to say if either animal would be able to adapt successfully to this new reality. It's clear, though, that the swap would disrupt the natural order of things in a profound way. Animal swap number 10. The rabbit-sized wolf and the wolf-sized rabbit. Imagine a world where wolves are the size of rabbits, and rabbits are the size of wolves. This size swap would create a dramatic shift in how both of these animals interact with their environment and each other. Wolves, known for their strength, hunting prowess, and pack mentality, would be greatly affected by their diminishment, while rabbits, typically small and docile creatures, would experience a significant increase in their influence and abilities. Let's dive into this thought experiment and explore how the world would change if rabbits were the size of wolves and wolves were the size of rabbits. To begin, let's consider what happens when wolves become the size of rabbits. Wolves are large, powerful predators, and their physical size is one of the primary factors that make them so effective in hunting. With their sharp teeth and strong jaws, wolves can bring down prey much larger than themselves. They rely on their size and strength to overpower their victims. But imagine if these majestic predators were suddenly reduced to the size of a rabbit. Instead of being the apex predators in many ecosystems, they would now be small, relatively harmless creatures, unable to hunt large prey effectively. At rabbit size, wolves would lose their primary hunting abilities. They could no longer take down large ungulates like deer or elk, which are some of their most common prey in the wild. Even smaller animals, such as hares or foxes, would be much harder to catch, as wolves would lack the speed, strength, and size necessary to overpower them. Their powerful jaws and sharp claws, though still present, would be far less effective when dealing with prey. These wolves would have to adapt by either scavenging or hunting smaller animals, such as insects or small birds, that they could overpower with their speed or agility. The hunting techniques of wolves would also change drastically. Normally, wolves are known for their pack hunting strategy, in which they work together to bring down larger prey. However, with their size reduced, these wolves would have to rely much more on individual hunting skills. They might focus on smaller animals or scavenge for food. It's likely that their social structures would also change. A wolf pack that depends on strength and teamwork to hunt large prey would now need to adapt to a different type of cooperation. Smaller packs could form, but they would have to adjust their tactics to focus on different types of prey. Furthermore, these smaller wolves would now have many more predators to worry about. While adult wolves are typically at the top of the food chain in the ecosystems they inhabit, smaller wolves would become easy targets for larger predators. Foxes, hawks, and even large birds of prey might see these miniature wolves as viable prey. In this new world, the role of wolves in the ecosystem would be completely altered, and their population might decline due to their vulnerability. On the other hand, let's look at the other side of the swap. What would happen if rabbits became the size of wolves? Rabbits are typically small, peaceful animals that rely on their speed and agility to escape predators. They are preyed upon by a variety of animals, including foxes, birds of prey, and of course wolves. However, if rabbits suddenly grew to the size of wolves, they would gain significant advantages over their usual predators. With their larger size, rabbits would be able to defend themselves much more effectively. A wolf-sized rabbit would have formidable teeth and claws, making it capable of defending itself from smaller predators that might once have been a threat. Its new size would allow it to fend off attacks from animals that would normally hunt it. The new size would also give rabbits an edge when it comes to dominance in their habitats. They could compete for resources with other herbivores in a way that smaller rabbits never could. They might even become the apex herbivores in some environments, eating much larger quantities of vegetation than smaller rabbits could ever manage. Interestingly, a wolf-sized rabbit might also take on some predatory behaviors. Though rabbits are typically herbivores, with their new size and capabilities, they might become more aggressive or opportunistic when it comes to food. They might start eating smaller animals, or even scavenging on the carcasses of other creatures, changing their entire feeding habits. This shift in diet could have significant effects on the environment and the animals around them. As rabbits are typically only grazers, with their new size, they might start to challenge the feeding patterns of other larger herbivores, creating a ripple effect through the ecosystem. Additionally, the behavior of these giant rabbits would likely change as well. Normally, rabbits are prey animals that rely on their instincts to hide and escape predators. But with the size and strength of wolves, they could become much more territorial. These large rabbits might be more aggressive when it comes to protecting their home range and resources. They might also become less fearful of predators and other animals, as they now have the size and strength to defend themselves. The once meek and skittish rabbit would become a force to be reckoned with, capable of intimidating and fending off almost any threat. But the new size of rabbits would also have significant ecological impacts. Their feeding habits would likely become more destructive. As herbivores, rabbits consume a variety of plants, and with their new size, they would consume far more vegetation. This could lead to overgrazing in certain areas, disrupting plant life and potentially causing the decline of certain species of plants. The larger rabbit populations might also deplete resources at a faster rate, putting a strain on their environment and forcing them to compete more fiercely for food. In this new world, the interactions between rabbits and wolves would be turned upside down. Normally, wolves hunt rabbits, but with the size swap, the predator-prey dynamic would change dramatically. The larger, more powerful rabbits would likely start to dominate areas that were once occupied by smaller herbivores, and the smaller wolves would find it much harder to hunt or scavenge for food. The very food chain would be altered, as both species would no longer be the same predators or prey that they once were. Instead of being a predator, the wolf would have to adapt to a smaller, more vulnerable role, while the rabbit would take on a new position in the food web, becoming a far more powerful and influential species. The impact on ecosystems would be profound, as the size swap would affect every part of the food chain. Rabbits, now much larger and more capable of defending themselves, would not only change their behavior but also potentially displace other herbivores. Wolves, on the other hand, would face new challenges in terms of hunting and survival. Their size reduction would limit their ability to hunt and defend themselves, and their population could decrease as they struggle to survive in an environment where they no longer dominate. Ultimately, a world where rabbits and wolves swap sizes would be a fascinating yet unpredictable place. The entire balance of predator and prey would shift, with both species finding themselves in new and challenging circumstances. It would lead to a complete reconfiguration of their roles in the ecosystem, forcing them to adapt in ways they never had to before. Animal swap number 11. the horse-sized seahorse and the seahorse-sized horse. Imagine for a moment a world where seahorses become the size of horses and horses shrink down to the size of seahorses. This incredible size swap would drastically change the roles these two creatures play in their respective environments. The horse, a majestic and powerful land animal, would experience a dramatic loss of physical dominance, while the seahorse, typically a small and delicate creature of the ocean, would become an immense force to be reckoned with. Let's explore the possibilities of what would happen if seahorses were as big as horses, and horses were no larger than seahorses. To begin, let's think about what would happen if seahorses suddenly became the size of horses. Seahorses are already fascinating creatures, known for their unique appearance, their ability to swim upright, and their peculiar mating habits. But a horse-sized seahorse would be a whole new world of surprises. Imagine a creature that, while still maintaining the same odd armored shape, is now large enough to be seen from miles away as it swims through the ocean. A seahorse of this size would dominate its environment, swimming gracefully through the water with the same upright posture, but now able to move with the force and majesty of a large marine mammal. With their larger size, seahorses would have to adapt in many ways. Firstly, their primary food source, plankton, would no longer suffice. A horse-sized seahorse would need much larger prey to sustain itself, such as larger fish or even other marine creatures. This shift in diet would have significant impacts on the food chain. Seahorses, which are generally considered small, peaceful creatures, would now find themselves in direct competition with other marine animals for resources. They might begin to compete with larger fish or even sharks for the same food, resulting in a significant alteration to marine ecosystems. Moreover, these enormous seahorses would face new challenges in terms of their mobility. Despite their size, seahorses are not the fastest swimmers. Their tiny fins move rapidly, but their overall speed in the water is quite slow. A seahorse the size of a horse would likely find it harder to maneuver through the water and might not be as agile as its smaller counterpart. This could make it more vulnerable to predators, and it would have to rely on other means of defense. Perhaps with the increase in size, the seahorse's armor-like body could become tougher, allowing it to withstand more damage from potential predators. Interestingly, these giant seahorses would also play a much larger role in their ecosystems. While small seahorses often hide in the safety of coral reefs or among seagrass, a horse-sized seahorse would need a larger, more expansive habitat. It could likely clear out large areas of coral, altering the environment and potentially disturbing the delicate balance of the ecosystem. The sheer scale of such an animal would bring new challenges for the environment, as it might displace smaller species that depend on the coral for shelter and food. Now let's flip the script and think about what would happen if horses were shrunk down to the size of seahorses. A seahorse-sized horse would look absolutely adorable, but it would also be incredibly vulnerable. Horses, which are known for their power, speed, and size, would lose all of their defense mechanisms. A small seahorse-sized horse would have no way to defend itself from predators, and its typical grazing habits would become much harder to sustain. Imagine a tiny, fragile horse trying to graze on the smallest plants in the field. It would be at the mercy of every predator that roams the land, from birds of prey to foxes, wolves, and even domesticated animals like cats and dogs. The size of a typical horse plays a large role in its interactions with its environment. Horses are often used as working animals, helping humans with farming, transportation, and sport. But at the size of a seahorse, a horse would be nearly useless for any of these purposes. Instead of carrying riders or pulling carts, a seahorse-sized horse would be incapable of doing much at all. Its physical stature would simply not support the strength required for traditional equine tasks. Socially, a horse-sized seahorse would likely lose much of its original behavior patterns. Horses are known for their herd mentality. Their interactions with one another involve complex social structures and communication, such as whinnies, nickers, and even body language. A tiny horse, however, would not be able to communicate the same way, and its social interactions would be fundamentally different. Instead of galloping across vast fields in herds, these tiny horses might become more solitary, struggling to find enough food and shelter in a world that is not designed for creatures of their size. Additionally, a smaller horse might need to adapt its diet significantly. Horses are herbivores, grazing on grasses, hay, and other plant-based materials. But the food required to sustain such a small creature might be very different from what we're used to. A seahorse-sized horse might need smaller plants or be forced to forage in places that regular horses couldn't reach, such as among smaller plants or in more densely vegetated areas. Interestingly, these small horses would also find themselves facing new environmental threats. For example, they would become much more vulnerable to predators, and their size would make it harder for them to escape. A full-sized horse can outrun many of its predators, but a tiny horse would have no such option. It would need to rely on its ability to hide or become more stealthy in order to survive. The horse's size isn't just for protection, it's also a key part of how they interact with humans. In the real world, horses are domesticated for their strength, stamina, and ability to carry loads. But a tiny horse would likely be too fragile to carry any human weight, and instead of being useful in labor or sports, it would likely be kept as a pet, or worse, might not even be able to sustain itself in the wild. Its life cycle and overall survival would be much more precarious in this size. This scenario would also raise some interesting questions about the evolutionary process. Horses have evolved over millions of years to be large, strong animals that can travel long distances and survive in various environments. Shrinking down to the size of a seahorse would fundamentally alter how they interact with the world, both biologically and ecologically. Would they still retain the same characteristics, or would they evolve into an entirely different species altogether? In conclusion, swapping the sizes of seahorses and horses would have far-reaching consequences, both for the animals themselves and for the ecosystems in which they live. Horse-sized seahorses would dominate the oceans, reshaping marine life and competing with other predators for food. Meanwhile, seahorse-sized horses would face a life of vulnerability, with little to no means of defending themselves from larger predators. The very essence of what makes horses and seahorses unique would be altered, and the balance of nature would shift in ways that are hard to predict. The swap would challenge everything we know about size, survival, and the way species interact with their environments. Animal swap number 12, the whale-sized rat and the rat-sized whale. Now let's imagine a world where whales and rats suddenly swap sizes. A rat as large as a whale and a whale as small as a rat. What would that mean for the animals, their environments, and their interactions with other species? It's a concept that sounds completely bizarre, yet fascinating. Let's dive into the strange world of a whale-sized rat and a rat-sized whale. To begin, let's think about what would happen if rats became the size of whales. Rats, often found scurrying around in urban environments or foraging in fields, are small, agile creatures. But imagine these creatures growing to the size of a blue whale, the largest animal known to have ever existed on Earth. A rat of this size would be an absolute marvel. Their small, rodent-like appearance might remain, but now their size would make them a dominant force in their environment. First, let's consider the physical changes that would occur. Rats are known for their incredible ability to squeeze into small spaces, climb, and scurry around at high speeds. But a rat the size of a whale would have to adjust to its new body. Its small, sharp claws might still be useful, but they would have to be scaled up dramatically to support the weight and strength of such a massive creature. Its teeth, sharp and ever-growing to help gnaw on food, would be massive, capable of cutting through anything from metal pipes to concrete. Imagine a giant rat using those teeth to burrow through cities or fields, tearing through infrastructure and creating chaos wherever it goes. But as we all know, rats are opportunistic feeders. In their current state, they can survive by eating crumbs, garbage, and whatever else they can scavenge. But a whale-sized rat would need an immense amount of food to sustain its massive body. Instead of scavenging for scraps, this enormous rat might need to consume entire ecosystems to survive, devouring forests, fields, or even entire cities in the process. It would also compete with other large animals for food sources, disrupting food chains in a significant way. Imagine a giant rat hunting down small herbivores, or perhaps even larger creatures, for its meals. It would have no trouble chasing down prey with its newfound size and agility. Of course, this giant rat would also become a significant threat to humans. Rats, in their natural state, already spread diseases like the bubonic plague, leptospirosis, and salmonella. A rat the size of a whale, however, would pose an even greater danger. Imagine the damage that such a creature could cause. Cities would have to reinforce their infrastructure to prevent these massive rodents from causing destruction, and humans would have to develop new ways of defending themselves. This would lead to a terrifying new world, where the once insignificant rat has become a colossal, dangerous creature. What about the environmental impact of such a change? If rats became whale-sized, they would likely disrupt ecosystems on a massive scale. Their need for food would be insatiable, and they could overrun entire landscapes, leading to the extinction of smaller species. Their ability to reproduce quickly would ensure that their population remains high, further exacerbating the chaos. The sheer scale of their destructive potential would likely result in a world where the balance of nature has been completely upended. On the other hand, let's imagine what would happen if whales were suddenly the size of rats. A whale, now tiny enough to fit into the palm of your hand, would face completely new challenges. Whales are majestic, enormous creatures that traverse vast oceans and sustain complex ecosystems. They are essential to the health of the ocean, feeding on plankton, krill, and other small organisms, while also supporting a host of species that depend on them for sustenance. But if a whale shrank down to the size of a rat, it would lose all of its current abilities and roles in the environment. A rat-sized whale would be completely vulnerable. In the ocean, whales use their size and strength to protect themselves from predators like orcas or sharks. But at the size of a rat, this tiny whale would be no match for such creatures. It would likely be easy prey for larger fish or sea predators, and even smaller marine creatures might see it as a potential meal. The once mighty whale, which plays an essential role in maintaining the health of ocean ecosystems, would now struggle to survive in a world that's not designed for creatures of its new size. Additionally, a rat-sized whale would no longer be able to feed on the same organisms it once did. Whales are known for their filter feeding techniques, using their baleen plates to trap small organisms like krill and plankton from the water. But at such a small size, a whale would be unable to gather enough food to sustain itself. It would likely rely on much smaller organisms, and even then, its tiny size would make it difficult to find enough nourishment. This shift in diet would not only affect the whale but could also have profound consequences on marine ecosystems, as the abundance of small organisms could be thrown out of balance. The social behavior of a rat-sized whale would also change drastically. Whales, especially species like orcas, are known for their complex social structures. They live in pods and interact with each other in sophisticated ways, communicating through vocalizations and working together to hunt for food. But a whale at the size of a rat would likely be solitary. The complex family structures of whales would be a thing of the past, as this tiny creature would be unable to participate in the same social groups that its larger relatives form. In terms of reproduction, a rat-sized whale would also face problems. Female whales give birth to live young, and the size of their calves is important for survival. If whales were as small as rats, their offspring would also be drastically smaller, and the chances of survival would be significantly lower. Furthermore, the tiny whale would face challenges in reproducing, as its small size would affect the birth process and the development of the young. Let's also think about the impact on the ocean environment. Whales play a crucial role in nutrient cycling in the ocean. When whales dive deep and feed on plankton and krill, they bring nutrients up from the deep ocean and redistribute them to the surface. This helps maintain the health of marine ecosystems and ensures that plankton, which is the base of the ocean food chain, remains abundant. A rat-sized whale would not be able to participate in this process in the same way. The loss of such a key player in nutrient cycling would cause a ripple effect throughout the ocean, potentially leading to a collapse of certain marine ecosystems. Finally, let's not forget the human impact. While a rat-sized whale would no longer pose a threat to the shipping industry or human activities in the ocean, it would certainly be a cause for concern for conservationists. Whales are already vulnerable due to human activities such as hunting, pollution, and climate change. A whale the size of a rat would be even more vulnerable, and efforts to protect these creatures would become more urgent. Instead of conserving these magnificent creatures for their size and their role in marine ecosystems, we would be left with tiny remnants of what were once some of the most awe-inspiring creatures on Earth. In conclusion, swapping the sizes of whales and rats would have profound and far-reaching consequences for both land and sea. A whale-sized rat would become a terrifying force of destruction, potentially overrunning ecosystems and posing new threats to human society. On the other hand, a rat-sized whale would lose all of its majesty, becoming vulnerable to predators and unable to fulfill its role in maintaining healthy ocean ecosystems. This size swap would be a game changer for the balance of nature, altering everything we know about these two species and the environments in which they live. Animal swap number 13, the bumblebee-sized hippopotamus and the hippopotamus-sized bumblebee. Let's step into a world where nature has decided to get a little wild, a little unpredictable, and perhaps a little confusing. Imagine a bumblebee suddenly growing to the size of a hippopotamus, and a hippopotamus shrinking down to the size of a bumblebee. This is a swap of proportions that seems straight out of a science fiction movie, yet the implications of such a swap are as fascinating as they are alarming. First, let's consider the implications of a bumblebee growing to the size of a hippopotamus. The bumblebee is a small, relatively non-threatening insect, known for its role in pollination and its distinct buzzing sound. It flies around gardens, fields, and forests, going from flower to flower, helping plants reproduce. But now imagine this little buzzing insect suddenly inflating to the size of a hippopotamus, a creature that weighs over 3,000 pounds and is capable of charging at speeds of 30 miles per hour. Physically, this massive bumblebee would be quite a sight. Its wingspan would need to be enormous to lift its newfound weight off the ground. The buzzing sound that we typically associate with bees would likely become a low-frequency, thunderous hum, reverberating through the air. The movement of such a large insect would cause a huge shift in the environment, with the bumblebee struggling to fly in a way it once did. The mechanics of flight for such a massive insect would not work in the same way as it does for a small bee. Its wings would have to beat at an impossibly fast rate to keep its body airborne, and the strain on its body could cause the bee to collapse under its own weight. Now imagine the ecological consequences of a bumblebee the size of a hippopotamus. Bees are already incredibly important to the environment due to their pollination activities, but a bumblebee of this size would be on an entirely different scale. Its appetite for nectar would be insatiable. A single bee of this size could consume and deplete an entire field of flowers in a matter of hours, and it would be capable of destroying ecosystems in its search for sustenance. Flowers, fruits, and plants would quickly be wiped out, and in turn the animals that rely on those plants for food would also face devastation. Imagine the imbalance this could create, where entire species of plants and animals become endangered due to the size and sheer consumption abilities of one giant bumblebee. Moreover, this enormous bee would likely start to attack and defend its territory aggressively. Bees are known for their defensive nature, and when threatened, they sting. Now imagine a sting from a bumblebee that weighs as much as a hippopotamus. The venomous sting would be much stronger and more dangerous. It could cause serious harm to large mammals and even humans. Its defensive behavior would not only be a concern for wildlife, but also for agricultural workers, farmers, and anyone who came into contact with it. The consequences for the animal kingdom would be grave. Birds and other insects that once coexisted with bees would be pushed out of their habitats as the massive bumblebee claims them as its own. Larger animals like deer and elephants could find themselves in the path of this monster, unable to escape its wrath. The balance of nature, once finely tuned by millions of years of evolution, would be thrown into disarray by the arrival of this oversized insect. Now let's consider the hippopotamus, shrinking down to the size of a bumblebee. In its typical form, the hippopotamus is a giant, bulky animal that spends most of its time in rivers and lakes, only coming on land to graze. Known for its immense strength, thick skin, and formidable tusks, the hippopotamus is a dominant force in its habitat. But imagine this once mighty animal shrinking down to the size of a bumblebee. At such a size, it would be completely vulnerable to nearly every predator. Its thick skin would no longer serve as a defensive mechanism against attacks from predators, as its small size would make it easy for birds, reptiles, and other creatures to consume it. One of the most significant changes would be the loss of its intimidating presence. Hippos are territorial creatures, known for charging at anything they deem a threat. A hippo the size of a bumblebee, however, would be incapable of exerting the same level of dominance. Instead of terrifying the animal kingdom, it would become an easy target for birds and other smaller creatures. Its tusks, once formidable, would now be completely ineffective as weapons for defense. The hippo would be rendered nearly defenseless, and its survival in the wild would become increasingly difficult. In terms of behavior, the tiny hippo would likely lose much of its current lifestyle. Hippos are social animals, living in groups called pods. They spend the majority of their time in water, wallowing in mud to protect themselves from the sun and to stay cool. At the size of a bumblebee, this hippo would no longer be able to enjoy the benefits of water the same way. It would likely be forced to leave the water altogether, since bodies of water suitable for a creature of its original size would now be far too large for such a small animal. The hippo's feeding habits would change as well. Instead of grazing on large amounts of grass, it would need to feed on much smaller organisms, and its diet would have to adapt accordingly. As for the ecosystem, a hippo the size of a bumblebee would no longer have a significant impact on its environment. In its original form, the hippo plays a key role in shaping riverbeds and maintaining the health of aquatic habitats. By feeding on plants and creating channels in the water, hippos help maintain the balance of ecosystems. But a tiny hippo would be far too small to have any of these effects, leaving ecosystems vulnerable to changes in water flow, vegetation growth, and biodiversity. The presence of a hippo at such a small size would also affect its predators. In its typical form, the hippo has very few natural predators, as its size and strength make it a dominant force. But a small bumblebee-sized hippo would be easy prey for many creatures. It would no longer be an apex herbivore, but rather a vulnerable target for any animal that could overpower it. This shift in the hippo's status would have far-reaching consequences for the animals that once depended on it, as its role in the food chain would be diminished. In conclusion, swapping the sizes of bumblebees and hippopotamuses would create a wild and unstable world. The giant bumblebee would wreak havoc on ecosystems, leaving destruction in its wake, while the tiny hippo would face an uncertain future, unable to survive in its original habitat. The balance of nature, once again, would be disrupted, with each animal struggling to adapt to its new role in the world. The chaos created by this size swap would undoubtedly lead to a shift in the ecological balance, and it would take a long time for the environment to recover from the impact. Animal swap number 14. The crocodile-sized hamster and the hamster-sized crocodile. Now imagine a world where nature has decided to play a dangerous and curious trick. What if the crocodile, the ancient reptile known for its power and ferocity, suddenly shrank down to the size of a hamster? And what if the adorable little hamster, with its cute face and small innocent stature, grew to the size of a crocodile? This is a swap of creatures from two entirely different worlds, one a predator, the other prey, and both would be utterly transformed in this wild, evolution-defying scenario. Let's first look at the crocodile shrinking down to the size of a hamster. The crocodile, a creature that has existed for millions of years, has evolved into one of the most effective predators on the planet. Its powerful jaws can snap shut with the force of several tons, and its muscular body allows it to ambush prey with stealth and precision. As it lies in wait, motionless, submerged in water, or resting on land, it presents an image of terror for any animal that dares approach. Its hunting strategy, based on patience and strength, makes it a formidable apex predator. But when the crocodile shrinks down to the size of a hamster, everything changes. First off, its massive jaws, which were once capable of crushing large animals, become far less menacing. While it may still have a powerful bite for its new size, it would no longer be able to take down the large prey it once did. No longer would it be able to ambush a wildebeest, a zebra, or a buffalo. Instead, it would need to focus on much smaller prey, perhaps insects, rodents, or small fish. With its tiny size, the crocodile's habitat and lifestyle would be dramatically altered. Crocodiles are typically found in freshwater rivers, lakes, and swamps, where they can submerge themselves and ambush their prey. Now at the size of a hamster, this once mighty predator would need to find new places to hide, and its hunting techniques would become less effective. It would be vulnerable to birds, larger mammals, and other creatures that could easily overpower it. In fact, at such a small size, the crocodile would likely become prey itself, hunted by other predators who would not hesitate to make a meal out of it. No longer would it be the apex predator in its environment, and it would struggle to adapt to the changes in its role in the ecosystem. But let's take a moment to think about how the hamster growing to the size of a crocodile would affect the world. The hamster, a small, cute rodent often found in cages as a pet, is typically harmless and docile. It's loved for its innocent appearance and playful behavior, with its tiny paws, fluffy fur, and twitching nose. But what if this small creature grew to the size of a crocodile, a creature that can measure up to 20 feet in length and weigh over a ton? Suddenly, this harmless little pet would be transformed into a terrifying, powerful predator. Its sharp teeth, usually used to gnaw on seeds and grains, would now become deadly weapons capable of tearing through flesh and bone. Its small twitching nose would be replaced by a powerful sense of smell, capable of tracking down animals from great distances. Imagine a hamster the size of a crocodile, charging through fields, knocking over trees, and terrorizing everything in its path. It would be a force to be reckoned with, no longer a cute tiny pet, but a monstrous creature capable of hunting and even killing larger animals. This oversized hamster would face unique challenges though. While its size would certainly make it a formidable predator, it would also be a serious disadvantage in some ways. Unlike a crocodile, which has evolved to move efficiently through water and land, a hamster's tiny legs and stocky body are not designed for such large-scale movement. The larger hamster might struggle with mobility, as its body would not be built to support such a vast size. Unlike its crocodilian counterpart, this hamster wouldn't be able to blend into its environment easily. Its speed and agility would be hindered, making it an easy target for larger, faster animals. Moreover, its diet would need to change significantly. A crocodile's diet consists of meat, anything from fish to large mammals. But a hamster, even if oversized, is still a herbivore by nature, typically feeding on grains, fruits, and seeds. Now imagine a hamster the size of a crocodile that needs to consume massive amounts of food to sustain itself. It would require an enormous amount of vegetation to stay alive, which could lead to massive overconsumption of plant life in its environment. This could destroy ecosystems and disrupt the food chain in ways we cannot fully predict. The oversized hamster would likely cause chaos wherever it went. It would be able to travel great distances, rapidly consuming vegetation and terrorizing smaller creatures that once would have been able to escape it. Its size and newfound strength would allow it to bulldoze its way through fields and forests, leaving a path of destruction behind. The animals that once coexisted with it would now find themselves struggling to survive. Small mammals, birds, and reptiles would face serious threats from this giant rodent. Even larger creatures that might have once been able to defend themselves could find themselves overpowered and outmatched by the sheer size and strength of the oversized hamster. On top of this, we have to consider the potential consequences for humans. Imagine a hamster the size of a crocodile running through the streets of a city or through rural areas. It would be an unpredictable and uncontrollable menace. People would have to figure out how to deal with this gigantic rodent, and cities might need to be evacuated to avoid being overrun by these massive creatures. The damage to infrastructure, crops, and human settlements would be substantial. With its immense size and destructive force, this oversized hamster would likely disrupt human life in unimaginable ways. In conclusion, swapping the sizes of a crocodile and a hamster would create a world that is both terrifying and chaotic. The once mighty predator, the crocodile, would become vulnerable, and the innocent, tiny hamster would be transformed into a terrifying, massive threat. The natural order would be thrown into disarray, with ecosystems struggling to cope with the rapid changes. The balance between predator and prey would be upended, and the entire animal kingdom would be forced to adapt to these extreme size shifts. What was once an apex predator could become prey, and what was once a harmless pet could become a deadly force in the world. The implications of such a swap would be nothing short of catastrophic for both the animal kingdom and human society. Animal swap. Number 15. The kangaroo-sized squirrel and the squirrel-sized kangaroo. Imagine a world where the roles of two creatures that seem vastly different are completely reversed. What if kangaroos, known for their powerful legs and hopping ability, suddenly became the size of squirrels? And what if the small, agile squirrel, often seen darting through trees, grew to the size of a kangaroo? The world would change drastically, and the consequences of such a swap would be mind-boggling. The ecosystems, food chains, and interactions between species would never be the same. Let's start by thinking about the kangaroo shrinking to the size of a squirrel. Kangaroos are iconic symbols of Australia, known for their powerful legs and distinctive hopping gait. These large marsupials can grow up to 8 feet tall when standing on their hind legs, and their powerful legs allow them to leap incredible distances. Kangaroos are also herbivores, feeding on grasses and shrubs, and they are built to cover large areas of land in search of food. But what happens when the mighty kangaroo shrinks to the size of a squirrel? First, we would see a dramatic change in its behavior. While the kangaroo's massive legs are adapted for powerful long-distance jumps, these legs would become less effective when the animal is reduced to the size of a small rodent. Instead of bounding across the Australian outback, the tiny kangaroo would likely adopt a more nimble, agile form of movement, perhaps more like the squirrel, which can dart around trees and jump short distances with ease. The kangaroo's trademark hopping gait would still be present, but it would no longer serve the same function in terms of covering vast distances. It would now need to focus on more localized food sources, searching for smaller plants and seeds rather than grazing on large expanses of grass. The size reduction would also have an impact on the kangaroo's diet. At its smaller size, the kangaroo would still be a herbivore, but it would need to consume a large quantity of food relative to its size in order to survive. Its diet would likely shift to smaller plants, seeds, and fruits, which are easier for a small animal to consume. The kangaroo's once massive need for food would now be lessened, but its hunger would be more frequent due to its smaller size and faster metabolism. Socially, the kangaroo would likely lose its place in the food chain. Larger predators, such as dingoes or even birds of prey, would have a much easier time hunting the small kangaroo. In the wild, this size change would leave the kangaroo vulnerable to a wide range of predators, and its ability to protect itself or escape would be compromised. Kangaroos are known for their strong kicks, which they use to defend themselves against predators. But at the size of a squirrel, a kick would no longer have the same effect. The kangaroo would be far more vulnerable to attack, and would struggle to find safety in the wild. It would have to rely on hiding or finding safe spaces in vegetation to avoid being spotted by larger animals. Now imagine the squirrel suddenly growing to the size of a kangaroo. The squirrel, a small, agile rodent that can leap and scurry across trees, is known for its ability to adapt to various environments. But if the squirrel suddenly grew to the size of a kangaroo, it would undergo an extraordinary transformation. First, let's consider the dramatic change in the squirrel's physical capabilities. Squirrels are known for their ability to jump between branches and scale tree trunks with ease. This agility is made possible by their small size and light weight. But imagine that same agility applied to a much larger frame. A squirrel the size of a kangaroo would have much longer, more powerful legs, allowing it to leap great distances, but also putting a strain on its body. The squirrel's once nimble movements would be replaced by heavier, more deliberate leaps as it adjusted to its new size. This size increase would likely make it harder for the squirrel to maintain the same level of agility and speed that it once had. Instead of darting between trees, the oversized squirrel might struggle to maneuver quickly, making it more vulnerable to predators. In terms of behavior, the size increase would cause a shift in the squirrel's lifestyle. Squirrels are known for their ability to gather and store food for the winter, particularly nuts and seeds. At the size of a kangaroo, the squirrel's food intake would dramatically increase. It would need to consume a massive amount of food to sustain its larger body, which could lead to competition with other animals for resources. The squirrel would be able to store and protect larger quantities of food, but this would also make it a target for predators looking to steal its hoard. The social dynamics of squirrels would also change with their new size. Squirrels often live in trees, in nests or burrows, and they have a complex social structure. They communicate with each other using a variety of vocalizations and physical signals. But a squirrel the size of a kangaroo would face new challenges in its social interactions. The need for a large territory would increase, and competition between squirrels would likely become more intense. Larger squirrels would need to defend much larger areas of space to gather food and establish dominance over other creatures. The social bonds that squirrels once had might dissolve into a more competitive and aggressive environment, as these large, powerful creatures would now be forced to fight for resources and territory. Furthermore, this oversized squirrel would no longer be the small, cute creature that many people associate with park benches and bird feeders. Its size and strength would make it a much more intimidating animal. Humans might even start to fear it, as its sheer size and powerful legs could cause damage if it felt threatened. Imagine a squirrel the size of a kangaroo raiding a garden, overturning trash cans, and causing chaos as it seeks out food. Its increased size would make it harder to capture or contain, and its presence in urban areas could become a major nuisance. The once tiny, harmless squirrel would become a major pest, impacting the lives of people living in suburban or rural areas. In conclusion, swapping the sizes of a kangaroo and a squirrel would create a wild and unpredictable new dynamic in nature. The tiny kangaroo would struggle to survive as a vulnerable prey animal, while the oversized squirrel would become a larger, more powerful creature capable of dominating its environment. The changes would affect the food chain, animal behaviors, and even human interactions with wildlife. The balance between predator and prey would be completely altered, and the ecosystems these animals inhabit would be forced to adapt to the new roles these creatures play in the world. What was once a cute, agile rodent would become a giant menace, and what was once a mighty hopping marsupial would now be at the mercy of its environment. This swap would turn the animal kingdom upside down and leave us questioning the delicate balance of evolution itself.